I'm Lisa Wallen with Directional Learning, and today you can tell that I have a clock here because that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the clock and how the clock works, and we're going to learn how to tell time. Well, did you know that clocks come in all kinds of different shapes? Well, look at this clock here. It's a round shape, but we want you to know that clocks can come in square shapes, star shapes, rectangle shapes, all kinds of different shapes. But the important thing is to know how the clock works. Once you know how the clock works, then you can tell time on any type of shape of a clock. It really doesn't matter the shape of the clock. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to teach you how to tell time on a clock in an easy, quick way so that if you see any type of shape of clock, you'll be able to tell time. So the easiest way to remember how to learn time is learning the components of the clock. So we're going to show you that the clock actually has direction. So do you see the circle? Do you see inside the circle? And do you see these inside numbers? Well, a clock has an inside. Do you see where the numbers are? This is the inside of the clock. And if a clock has an inside, then it has an outside. Do you see where I'm pointing? This is the outside of the clock. So a clock has an outside. A clock has an inside, and these are the inside numbers. And these inside numbers tell us the hour. So these are our hour numbers. So the first thing we look at when we look at a clock is the inside at our hour numbers. Just remember, that's the first thing we look at, inside of the clock. So all you have to remember is there's an inside and there's an outside. So you just learned that a clock has an inside and an outside. Well, we're going to break up the clock in half for you so that you see that it has direction. So let's break it up in half. If I were to draw a line down the middle of the clock, that would break our clock in half. Do you see? Now we have two pieces. So guess what? Our clock has direction. So on this side, guess who lives there? The left. So see, you can see our number 1. You remember it's the dragon and its tongue is sticking out towards the left. Or we can follow that capital L building. Remember, we can put the star in the corner and follow it. So this whole side of the clock is the left, or the one side if you want to think of in numbers. And then that means that this side of the clock is our 3 side, or our right side. So our clock has two pieces. See, it has a left side and it has a right side. And guess what? It actually has 3 pieces because do you see? This is the middle. Okay, let's put the middle there. So now you know the clock. It has a left side, a middle, and it has a right side. So see, our clock has direction. So now that you learned that our clock has an inside, an outside, and it has a left side, a middle, and a right side, now we can learn about the clock. Do you see these numbers in our clock? Well, we first start off when we count at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Do you see that? So when we read a clock, it's kind of different because remember, when we read or write, we always start when we're looking at a word just like this. We always start from the left and then we move to the middle and then the right. Do you see that? So looking at a clock is a little different. Actually, it's the reverse. See, our numbers start in the right, so we start on the right. And then we move to the middle, so our middle stays the same, and then we move to the left. So reading a clock is different from reading, even when we write, because if we were to write, we still start on the left and then we make our way to the right. So reading a clock is different. Just remember, our numbers start on the right side, and then we move to the middle, the left, and then back to the middle. So it's a little different. So next, we're going to learn all our inside numbers. So we already learned how the numbers start on the right side, but now do you see that we have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So in our inside numbers, it goes from 1 to 12. So there's only 12 numbers. Next, do you see that when we count 1, 2, our numbers are getting bigger? And something else to think about is we're going down in a downward motion. 4, 5. So on the right side, numbers 1 to 5 live on the clock. Now if we go to the 6 at the bottom, that's the middle, or on the 2 side. So then we start to move to 7, 8. Notice our numbers are getting bigger, but we're going up in an upward motion. 9, 10, 11. So on the left side, we have numbers 7 through 11. Then we go back to the middle and we have number 12. So on the right side, we have 1 to 5 that live here. And then in the middle, we have 6. We actually have 2 numbers. And then back to the left, we have 7 to 11. And as our numbers get bigger, it crawls up. And then we go back to the middle. So do you see that? We have 12 in the middle at the top. So that's how our clock works. We're going to break the clock up even more in direction. So I'm going to put a line above the 9 and 3. And then I'm going to put a line under the 9 and 3. Do you see that? And we're going to look at this number here because we're going to highlight this number 3 here. So I want you to look at that. And then I want you to come down and look at this number here that's in the middle. And then we're going to move to the left of the clock. This is the 9. And then back to the middle, 12. And then, of course, our 3 was in the right. So do you see what these numbers have in common? It's counting by your 3s. 3, 6, 9, 12. So I kind of call these my superstar numbers because they're important. They just kind of help you remember where all the other numbers are. So we're going to cover our superstar numbers up. And if you can remember what this number is, well, it's easy. It's on the right and it's on the 3 side. So it's the 3. So then I want you to remember the numbers that come before 3. It's 1 and 2. So the numbers that come before 3 is 1 and 2. And then remember, this is 3. What would come after 3? 4 and 5. Do you see that? 4 and 5 would come after 3. Then, if we move to 6, what are the numbers that come before 6? Do you remember? You can go backwards and you can say 5 and 4 if you like, or you can say 4 and 5. So the numbers that come before 6 here are 4 and 5. Now the number that comes after this number here, do you remember the number? It's 6. So the number that comes after 6 is 7 and 8. So the number that comes after 6 is 7 and 8. Do you remember this number? If we're counting by our 3s, this is 3, 6, 9. And the numbers that come before 9 is, I go backwards here, 8 and 7. So the numbers that come before 9 are 8 and 7. Now, the numbers that come after 9 is 10 and 11. And you notice after we're going up, after here we were going down. So the numbers that come after 9 are 10 and 11. Do you remember this last number? It's 12, the last number. So the numbers that come before 12 are 11 and 10. Just back up, 11 and 10. And then the numbers that come after 12 are 1 and 2. See how we learned that pretty quickly? It just makes a nice picture for us to remember where the numbers are. And it's going to make telling time a lot faster for us. Okay, now let's look at the clock here. Can you remember the number here? If you can remember the number here, then you can remember all these other numbers. So the number underneath the star is 3. Pretty easy. So what comes before 3? 1 and 2. Let's check. 1 and 2. Then what would come after this number here, which is our 3 on the right side? This should be 4 and 5. Well, let's just look. 4 and 5. So you just remembered all the numbers on the right side or the 3 side. Now we're going to move to our middle of our clock, okay? So what is this number? If this is 5, this is 6, and this is our last number. If this is 11, this is 12. So you just remember the numbers in the middle. Let's learn the left side of the clock. Okay, so do you remember our star number? Well, if this is 3, 6, this is 9. So just remember on the left side, it's the 9. Do you see it? And then you can say what comes before 9. I'll just go backwards. 8, 7. And then what comes after 9? Well, that's easy. 10 and 11. Do you see that knowing what the star number is helps you know where all the other numbers live? Okay, and our last number, that's easy. We already said the numbers that live in the middle is 12 is one of them. So you just learned the whole clock. All the inside numbers are our numbers. Okay, now that you learned where all our numbers live on the clock, now it's time to look at our inside numbers. Well, I'm going to bring out our inside hand, and we call this a hand, even though it's an arrow, because the hand points at the number. And do you see it's our shortest hand? Our shortest hand points to the inside numbers. So we have 2 rules to be called the hour. In order for it to be called the hour, it has to be pointing at the number or after the number. And here it's pointing at the number. What number is it pointing at? It's pointing at 6. So that would be our hour. Let's try another one. Well, the first thing we do when we tell time is we look at our inside numbers, or our inside hand. And it's our shortest hand because it points to the inside numbers. And remember, for it to be the hour, it has to be pointing at the number. What number is it pointing at? It's pointing at the 10. So the hour is 10. Pretty easy. Let's try another one. Well, we look at the inside first in our inside hand, and it's pointing to our inside number. What number is it pointing at? It's pointing at the number 8. So our hour is 8. And let's look at this one. Well, it's pointing at the 10, so it's 10. That's the hour. Now, what would happen if we had the hand pointing between a number? Do you see how it's between the numbers? It's not pointing at the number. Well, the second rule is in order for it to be called the hour, it has to be pointing after the number. So I kind of play a game out of it. Let's look at the 1 first. Is it pointing at the 1? It is not. But is it pointing after the 1? It is. So the 1 would win. It just has to be pointing after the number, and then that number wins. So it would be 1. Let's try another one. Well, we look at the inside and the inside hand that's pointing at the inside numbers. Okay, so who would win? Well, it's the same rule. If it has to be pointing after the number to win. So let's see who wins. Let's look at the 7. Okay, is it pointing at the 7? It is not. But is it pointing after the 7? It is. So the 7 would win. Now let's look at the 8. Is it pointing at the 8? It is not. Is it pointing after the 8? It isn't. So the 7 would win. Let's try another one. Okay, who would win, the 12 or 1? Is it pointing at the 12? It isn't. But is it pointing after the 12? It is. So the 12 would win. Let's look at one more. Well, who would win, the 4 or 5? Is it pointing at the 4? It is not. But is it pointing after the 4? It is. So the 4 would win. So all you have to remember is it has to be pointing either at the number to be called the hour or after the number to be called the hour. That's all you have to remember when you're looking at the hand in the inside of the clock. Something I wanted to show you the term after. So on this side, on the right side of the clock, it's going to look different, our arrow. So for instance, if we were to figure out what the hour would be between these two numbers, well, it's the same process. Is it pointing at the 4? It isn't. But is it after the 4? It is. So the 4 wins. Now notice our arrow for after is under the number here. So your arrow for after will be under the number. Watch, let me show you another one. So say we needed to find out the hour on this side of the clock, on the right side. Well, look at, is it going to be the 1 or the 2? It's going to be the 1, right? Because it's pointing after the 1. So notice after is pointing under the number, the arrow. Now, if we take an arrow on this side of the clock, the left side, let's do that and look, compare it. I think comparing it is good. So here is our arrow, and we have to figure out who's going to win between these two numbers. Well, is it pointing at the 7? It isn't. But is it after the 7? It is. So the 7 wins. But notice after is above the number. Do you see? The arrow is above the number this time. So I wanted to show you that. So if we take another number, let's do this, put our arrow between there. We need to figure out who the hour is. It's either 9 or 10. Well, is it pointing at 9? No, but it's pointing after 9. So 9 wins. Now look at the arrow. It's above the number. Remember over here it was under the number. So there's a difference. I just wanted you to see that. All you have to remember is after on the right side of the clock will be under the number. And after on the left side of the clock, the arrow will be above the number. That's all you have to remember. Okay, now we're going to look at the outside of the clock. Look at our outside of the clock. Do you see we have numbers on the outside of the clock? And guess what? We have a different hand. We have a longer hand. Do you see that it's so long that it points to the outside numbers? And we call these numbers here the minute numbers. So this is called our minute hand. And it's so long it has to point to the outside. And all you have to do is to read the hand is look to see where it's pointing. It's pointing at the 45. So this would mean 45 minutes. Let's look at our next hand. It's so long, it's pointing to the outside of the clock. And it tells us the minutes. So this is pointing at the 10. So it would be 10 minutes. Pretty easy. Let's look at this hand. It's pointing to the outside numbers. So it's pointing to the minutes. So this would be 30. Do you see how we're reading the minutes outside of the clock? The minutes are on the outside. Now, what would we do if our hand was pointing on one of these, on this line here? Well, I'm going to tell you these lines here are called ticks. Now, do you see our numbers on the outside of the clock? Well, if you look at them, watch, let's count together. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. Did you see that we counted by our 5s all the ways to the number 60? So these ticks here, guess what? If we were to count all the ticks, it would take us to 60. Watch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And if we keep counting, it'll take us all the ways to 60. So instead of counting by our 1s, we can count by our 5s faster. And then these ticks here, so for instance, look at this tick here. Okay, our arrow is on the tick. Do you see that? It's pointing to an outside number. So the ticks are an outside number. So an easy way to think about it is if this one before it is 10, what comes after 10? 11. So the minute would be 11. Let's look at our next one. Well, remember it's pointing at the tick. If this is 55, this is 56, 57, 58. So it's 58 minutes. And let's try another one. What would we do if our minute hand, was pointing to this outside number here? Well, remember, we said it's 60, but with time, we say o'clock. So if it lands here, our minute hand, on the 60, we say o'clock. Now, doesn't this is a 0, right, to remind us it's 60, but think about the alphabet. It's an O. So just remember an O, o'clock. So we would say o'clock. Something else I wanted to tell you special about our clock is, look, do you notice from O all the ways to 9, we only have 1 digit? But when you get to 10, look, we have 2 digits, meaning 2 numbers. And when we go around the clock, there's 2 digits here. Do you see 2 digits, 2 digits? But when we get to the O, then we only have 1 digit here. And all the ways to the 9 here, there's only 1 digit. So here we say o'clock. If it landed here, our minute hand, we'd say 01. And then 02, 03, 04, 05. Do you see we just put an O in front of it? 06, 07, 08, and 09. And then we go to 10. We just say 10. Watch, let's practice. Well, what if our minute hand pointed at this tick here? Remember, we would say 07. So that would be 07. Let's try another one. What if our minute hand was pointing to this outside number? Well, same thing. It's before the 10, so anything here, and from the 1 to the 9, we put an O in front of it, so it would be 09. And an easy way to remember is we could say 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Put my O in front of it, 09. Or if you want to go in the reverse way, backwards, you could start here and say this is 10. So what comes before 10? 9, but put your O in front of it, 09. So do you see anything from the 1 to the 9? We just add an O to it. All right, what would this say? Well, it's our minute hand, so it's pointing outside. So it landed on the 5. But remember, don't forget your O, 05. Now we're going to remember the outside numbers of the clock. So if this is 15, now we have to remember where the 15 lives. Well, do you remember the star that's underneath here? It lives by the 3. And remember, the 3 lives on the right side. Well, so does the 15. Now, if this is 15, what numbers come before 15? Well, if we're counting by our 5s, then we know this is 5 and this is 10. Let's check. 5, 10. And look at our 5. It lives by the 1. And the 10 lives by the 2. Now, if this is 15, what comes after 15? 20, 25. Let's check. 20, 25. So do you see where the 20 lives? It lives by the 4. And the 25 lives by the 5. Just remember, 25 ends in 5, and that's the 5. And what number is this? Do you remember? This is the 6. So the 30 lives by the 6. And just remember, what comes after 30? Well, if we're counting by our 5s, this should be 35 and this should be 40. And if you look, the 35 lives by the 7 and the 40 lives by the 8. Let's look at the number where the star is. Do you see the 45? Well, what does the 45 live by? Do you remember what the star is? It's 9. So the 45 lives by the 9. Now what comes after 45? Can you remember? Well, if we're counting by our fives, 50 and then 55. So it's pretty easy. The 50 lives by the 10 on the left side, and the 55 lives by the 11. And let's look at our next number. What comes after 55? Well, we know it's 60. But for this, we know it's 60, but we say O. Just remember O clock. Now I'm going to remove all our dots. And I'm going to show you something else that's really neat about our clock to remember the outside numbers. So, do you see this 5 in the middle of my clock? Well, I kind of put a 5 here. And if you know your times table, you could go like this. 5 times 1 is 5. All you have to know is your 5s. 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times 3, because remember this is 3, is 15. 5 times 4 is 20. And we could go all the ways around the clock. 5 times 5 is 25. And 5 times 6 is 30. 5 times 7 is 35. 5 times 8 is 40. 5 times 9, remember this is the 9, is 45. 5 times 10 is 50. 5 times 11 is 55. And remember, when we get up here, we just say O clock. Now it's time to put our clock together. Remember, the first thing we look at is the inside. We look at our inside hand, the shortest hand, and it's pointing to the inside numbers. So, what is it pointing towards? It's pointing at the 12. So, the hour is 12. And then the second step is we look at our outside of our clock. So we look at the longest hand, our minute hand, and it's pointing at the 37. So put it together, 12:37. That's the time. Pretty easy. Look at the inside, then the outside. Now you're ready to start telling time. Remember, we have to remember the steps. The first thing we look at is we look at the inside numbers. So we look at our inside hand, the shortest hand. What is it pointing at? It's pointing at the 12. So the hour is 12. Then the second step we look at is we look at our minute hand. And we see where our minute hand is pointing. It's the longest hand and it's pointing outside. So if this is 20, this is 21, 22, 23, 24. So the time is, put it together, 12:24. So it's pretty easy to tell time now that you know the whole clock. Let's try another one. Remember, we look at the shortest hand that's pointing to the inside numbers. Now, is it pointing at 1? It is not. Is it pointing after the 1? It is, so 1 wins. So it's 1. And then we look at the minute hand that it's pointing outside to the 30. So put it together, 1:30. See, telling time is super easy. Let's try another one. Okay, remember the rule. You look at the inside numbers first. So we look at our shortest hand and it's pointing at the 6. So 6, and it's pointing, our minute hand is pointing to the O. So remember, we say 6 o'clock. And do you know the o'clock means that the hour has changed? Because it used to be 5 o'clock. Now it's 6 o'clock. Just remember, o'clock means that our hour changed. Let's look at this one. Okay, remember, we look at the smallest hand, the shortest hand, the inside numbers, and it's pointing at the 9. And then the second thing we do is look at the minute hand that points outside. So if we know that this is 1, 2, 3, it is 9:03. Remember to put the O in there, 9:03. So the time is 9:03. Just put it all together. Let's try one more. Okay, same thing. We look at the smallest hand. What is it pointing at? Well, let's look at this. Is it pointing at the 9? It is not. Is it pointing after the 9? It is. Do you see that it's not quite at the 10 yet? So that couldn't be the hour. So it's pointing after the 9. So the 9 wins. It's 9. And then if we know if this is 55, then this is 59. So put it together, 9:59. Just remember the arrow either has to be on the number to call it or after the number. If you look at the 10, it's not quite on the 10, so that's not the hour. Remember, it has to be on the number or after the number. And when the minute hand gets close to the old clock, that means that our hour is going to change soon. So we have one more minute and then the hour will change to 10 o'clock. So now you learned everything about time. One thing I wanted to show you that sometimes when you look at clocks, there might not be outside numbers, but that's okay. Just remember the first step is always look at your inside numbers. Look at the inside of the clock, so that's your shortest hand. And is it pointing at the 2? It is not, but it's pointing after the 2, so the 2 would win. Then for your minute hand, remember it's the hand that points outside the clock. And if this is 9, well, do you remember who lives here? You could say 9 times 5 is 45, or you can back up. This is 30. Then count by your 5s. 35, 40, 45. So this is 45. So the time is 2:45. So see, sometimes you just have to remember who lives on the outside. Let's try another one. Well, we look at the inside and it's pointing at the 11. And then here, look at the tick. Well, all we have to remember is what number lives here. And all we have to remember is 5 times 4 is 20. So 21, 22, 23. So it's 11:23. And if you can't remember that, then all you have to do is come up here. Remember who lives here by the 3, the 15. So this is 20, 21, 22, 23. So that's how all you have to do. Just remember your outside numbers, and then telling time makes it really simple for you. So now that you know how the clock works, you always read the inside, then the outside of the clock. And if you remember where all your outside numbers live, then telling time is pretty simple. So remember, our clock has lots of direction to it. So all you have to do is figure out the direction of the clock and the way the clock works. And telling time is really easy. We thank you for listening to Directional Learning, and we can't wait to teach you more.